encryption and certificates. In this nugget, we talk about encryption and certificates. The first thing we discuss is the encrypting file system, which is a great way to secure your files from prying eyes. And with the EFS, only you or people you specify can access your files, and so far, really, EFS is pretty much unbreakable. It's all based on certificates, so I'm going to talk to you about certificates as well as how to export them and to manage the certificates in basic configurations. And then we'll also talk about BitLocker. You might want to not only encrypt individual files or folders, but you might also want to encrypt the entire hard drive. And this will protect it from offline attacks, rootkits, other kinds of things where you might have a threat to your entire operating system and data. Alright, with EFS encryption, or encrypting file system is what this is, then what you can do is to encrypt a file so that only you can open it, or only people that you select can open that file. Anybody else won't be able to, because it'll be thoroughly encrypted, just like it went through some kind of a digital blender of some kind, and it won't be sensible or even able to open that file at all. So this is an excellent way to secure your data, but you do have to be a little bit careful with it because there's a key system involved in this, and if you ever lose the keys, then you might permanently lock yourself out of your own files, and that could really ruin your whole day. Now, when you encrypt files, you really just encrypt the files only. The interface makes it look as if you can encrypt folders. That's not technically possible. Although it looks like you can, what's really happening is you're sending a flag to that folder that says, encrypt the contents of the folder. The folder itself cannot ever actually be encrypted. Now, once we do this, we also need to make sure that we have some kind of a plan for recovery, and I'll show you a little bit about that here as we go as well. For recovery, by default in a domain environment, the domain administrator account, not the domain admins group, but the domain administrator account has the capability to recover files. Also, when it comes to indexing, indexing is greatly improved in Windows Vista, and this helps us to be able to find files much, much faster than we've ever been able to before. So it's very, very improved, but it does not actually index encrypted files, although it gives you the impression that you can, and I'll talk to you about this here as well, but it gives you there's a checkbox that makes it look as if you can index encrypted files. In reality, you can't, because the system performs the indexing, and only your user account actually has the decryption key through your certificate to be able to open up those encrypted files, so the system won't even actually be able to see those files. And the system has to be able to look inside the contents of files to be able to index the words that are in the file. Also, this is not available. EFS is not available in any of the home editions, like the Starter Edition or the Home Edition or Home Premium. Anything that says Home in it or Starter, you can't use EFS with. But all the other ones, such as Enterprise, Ultimate, Business, all of those, you can use EFS encryption for. Now, let's just go ahead and take a look now at how we can actually make encryption work and how we can also recover in the event of a lost encryption key. So to show this to you, I've created a remote desktop connection to another computer, a Vista computer named Vista Client 01, where we have a folder here that you can see on the taskbar entitled My Boss. And then the contents of it is, why my boss is dumb. Well, that looks like something that a user might want to protect. They might go to this and they right click and they choose properties and they say, how can I make sure my boss doesn't see this? How about read only? Well, no, but that means that they can't change it, but they can at least read it. That won't do any good. How about hidden? Well, I know there's ways that you can view hidden documents as well. They could go to security as well and customize that as they need to, and that would be one way of doing it. But they may also go to advanced, and the advantage of this is that if I go to advanced and encrypt the contents to secure the data, then even someone who has proper security permissions and NTFS permissions to read the file, when they try to double click on it, they won't be able to, because this is going to kind of trump that capability. So we'll encrypt the contents to secure the data, and we'll get met with a message here in just a moment when I click OK again. Then asks if I want to encrypt the file and its parent folder. Remember that folders don't actually get encrypted. It just puts a flag on it to tell it to encrypt the contents of the folder. Normally that's recommended so you don't wind up with contents of a folder that some are encrypted, some are not, and so forth. What you should do is to encrypt the entire folder and then make sure that you only put content in there that you really want encrypted. For my purposes, only for illustration's sake, I'm going to encrypt the file only and then click OK. And now notice that it does change color as well to a green color, indicating that it is indeed encrypted. So then let me show you a couple of other things related to this encryption. So first of all, I'm going to right click on this and go back to properties, and then go again to the encryption section right here. And notice that there's a details tab. Within this, it identifies who encrypted this document, and then it has a certificate thumbprint that we see over here. This uniquely identifies my certificate. You see what happens is that when I encrypt this document, it encrypts it with a symmetric key, which is then encrypted in itself with a public key. Only my private key that we see here, that's identified right here, is capable of decrypting the file encryption key that allows us to see this document. So that's more technical data than you need to know for the exam in particular, but just so that you know, I do have to have a certificate to be able to decrypt that data. When I do this the first time on a standalone computer, workgroup computer, or a computer in a domain that does not have a certificate authority that automatically issues certificates, then it will create its own self-signed certificate. So this certificate right here didn't come from the domain or anything. It was generated automatically here when I chose to encrypt this file for the first time. Now then, also within my domain, and this is the default, the domain administrator account, not domain admins particularly, but the domain administrator account that we see here is the recovery agent. So these two accounts do have the capability to read this file. Okay, there's a little bit of a caveat with that one. I'll show you that when I show you how to recover it. Now, what I can also do is if I'm concerned that, what if my profile gets corrupt and my certificate gets lost and I won't be able to decrypt this data, then I can back up the keys as well. And by the way, that is where your certificate will be stored. It's stored in a crypto environment within your own profile. So if my profile got corrupt or it got deleted or somebody reinstalled the operating system and got rid of all the profiles, for example, then we could have some orphaned files there that I could no longer decrypt, and I'd have to depend upon this person to be able to do that. But you just back up the keys and it takes you through a wizard, and then you next finish through it, and what you would do then is to have it on a thumb drive or some other secure location. Okay, so that's pretty much it for that, except that I can also point out that with this I can add additional users that could also view this document. This is a newer feature. Didn't originally come out with EFS when Windows 2000 was available, but now what I can do is to click on Add and add additional users if I have other accounts that I've got in here. Notice that I don't have all of the accounts throughout my domain here because I think I have some other Phoenix users. It only has those accounts that have encrypted files on this local computer in the past, and then it's able to find their certificate in the profile right here. So that's why it's able to find these users, but not find users from the domain. Now, I could click Find User and then find users in the domain. It looks like that would work, but it really doesn't. What has to have happened is those users, it would be able to find and use those users only if we had a certificate authority issuing certificates to our users that were enabled for EFS. I don't have that in this environment, so that's what we won't be able to do that quite there. But otherwise, again, of course, I could just select a user, click OK, and now both of these users are able to do that, to access this document. Okay, but I'm just going to remove that user and click OK, and then OK again and OK again. Now, I mentioned earlier that it kind of gives the illusion that you can right-click on a folder and choose Properties to go to Advanced, and then encrypt contents to secure data. This is a little bit more of an honest statement here. In previous versions of Windows, it just gave you the impression that it was encrypting the folder, but no, really it's encrypting the contents of that folder. Okay, so I could do that, and then any other, and I can apply to this folder, subfolders, and files, as you see there. And then if I do that, then any other contents within this that I create, okay, let's see, I'll just create another document, my favorite comic books. Something like that. Notice that it automatically becomes green, indicating that it is also an encrypted document, which we can also confirm here as well. And that's only because I placed that document in an encrypted quote-unquote folder. Now, also, I mentioned a little while ago that it kind of also gives the illusion that you can index encrypted documents. And if I go back to the properties here and then go to the advanced button here, then we see that index this file for faster searching. It gives me the impression that it's indexing it. It's really not. So it doesn't really matter if I check that box or not, because it cannot index a encrypted file because the system will not be able to open it. The other thing I want to show you there that is kind of misleading, just so you know, this is just an FYI, is that if I go to Control Panel to manage my indexing here, then I go to System and Maintenance, and then I go down to Indexing Options, And then here, if I go to the Advanced button, and I'll have to enter in some administrator credentials, then what we see here is we can also check this box that says Index Encrypted Files. Well, there you go, James. You can too index encrypted files. Well, no, actually you can't. You see, that's not indexing encrypted files either. What that's really doing is something else. You see, remember I mentioned earlier that the system does the indexing. And because of the fact that the files that I encrypted previously were indexed only, or rather encrypted only under that specific Phoenix User 01 account, then it's not able to index them. However, for offline files, I can choose to encrypt the offline files. When I do that, guess what? The system is the one that performs the encryption. Therefore, it's able to index its own encrypted files in the offline files cache. So that's what that relates to, all right? Just so that we're clear on that. Now here I've logged off and logged back onto my Vista Client 01 computer as the trainer account. Now I am a domain admin, enterprise admin. I mean, I've pretty much got the world at my fingertips, so to speak, because I've got quite a bit of power here, so I can wield a lot of capabilities here. But notice that here, when I double-click on my boss, I can access the contents. Well, why is that? I thought it was encrypted. Remember, the folder's not encrypted. It just has a flag that tells it to encrypt the contents. But now, look what happens when I try to look at, my favorite comic books. Access denied. Oh, okay. Well, how about why my boss is dumb? Access denied. Okay, so the reason why this is because that these are encrypted, and I do not have the capability to be able to decipher these particular contents. Alright, so here's how we're going to do this. I've gone to my server now, where I've gone to a console, an empty console, and I added in the certificates for the current user as a snap-in to go to the personal certificates. Here we see the administrator account right here, but the one we're interested in is this one that says File Recovery. I want to use that one to export this so that I can then import it to the destination client computer and then decrypt the file. So I'll right-click to choose Export here, click on Next through the wizard to export the private key. And by the way, this does have to be done on the first domain controller in the domain. Other domain controllers will not have the same administrator account and the same keys that we'll see here. So then I'll click on Next, and I'm just going to kind of next my way through the wizard. Not that much to it, really. And as we remember the password, and then specify a location for it. Now I've created a share on this computer on the C drive called certs, and I've made it available only to administrators, which would certainly be a good practice. You might also want to put it on a physical media like a thumb drive that you could secure and then lock up when you're done. I'll just call this admin cert. Okay, and save it right there. And that'll be pretty good. That's pretty much all I need to do, and then I just finish it. That's it. Alright, so here's the location of it. That's the file that I just exported. Now I need to go over to my Vista computer, my Vista Client 01. This is the system that I have the files that are encrypted on. I've currently logged on as the administrator account because I need to import that certificate into the administrator's personal store. By the way, let's also just confirm that I cannot access those documents. Where'd they go? Here we are. On the C drive under my boss, and then why my boss is dumb, can't access it. Okay, so that's going to be a bit of a problem. So what I'll do here then is I'm going to import the certificate. So I could right click here and choose Find Certificates. Again, I'm in the certificates for the current user, or I could just browse through the file system, which I usually find a little easier, or I could UNC to the location. Remember, I've got that share over on DC Nugget 2008. I think it's called certs. There it is. There's my admin cert that you just saw me export. Now I'm going to import this certificate, and I'll just go ahead and next my way through this wizard as well. And as I do this, this is an important interface right here. I want to place the certificates in the following store. It has to be in the personal store. And then as I click on Next and Finish, we'll now see then that the import was successful. And if I refresh the screen here, we'll now see a certificates node here with the administrator's file recovery certificate. And then next, all I need to do is to go back to the files that were encrypted that I need to decrypt. So I'll go back over here. Doesn't seem to want to restore. There it goes. And then I'm going to go to my computer, to the C drive, to that folder where it was my boss, and then why my boss is dumb. And as I double click on this, voila! I have now been able to access this document. Why? Because I logged on as the administrator, imported that file recovery certificate into my personal store. That was important. Remember, it has to go in the personal store. And then I'm able to open this document just as if I was the original user who had encrypted it in the first place. Now we can see why the boss is dumb. Okay, so that's pretty much all there is to it. Also, if I wanted to, if we realized, well, hey, this is maybe this is an HR issue or something like that, then I could just decrypt it just the same way the original user could have as well, by going to their advanced properties and clearing that checkbox and clicking OK. And that would be pretty much be it. Now it would not be encrypted anymore. Now, I do also want to go over with you a little bit about managing certificates. Fortunately, we've already seen a lot of that just in managing the EFS process, because we saw how we can export certificates and import certificates. One thing to keep in mind is that the EFS certificates that I worked with just a moment ago were self-signed, meaning that I did not have a certificate authority in place to be able to create and distribute certificates from a central location. So we saw that in fact if we go to, let me go over here, if we go to a specific certificate that we had worked with in the past here, I'll just go to one of these. And here's an EFS certificate. If I go to the certification path, we see that the certification path points to itself. It doesn't point to Thought or VeriSign or one of those other CAs or an internal Active Directory CA. No, it was a self-signed certificate, and it points to itself. The other type that you would have would, of course, be a certificate authority issued one, or a CA issued one from those well-known types of companies. Let's just go ahead and take a look at another location here. I've gone to a domain controller here that's in a different domain, and this might be the case if maybe I've got a partner, a business partner that I do work with, and they have a web page that my users use, and it's an HTTPS web page where they've protected it with certificates. Well, every time my users go to their website, it gives them a big red warning saying, you don't trust this certificate, or something like that. We want to try to mitigate that. What we could do is to take their certificate, like this one right here on this domain, which is totally different from my nuggetlab.com domain, and we could import it so that we can now trust it and we don't get the annoying message anymore, and then we would trust any certificates that this certificate authority issued. And that's what a CA does. It issues certificates to other certificate authorities and or users and computers. So what I would do here then is I would, again, just re-export this just the same way as I've done in the past, which you saw me do. And I don't want to export the private key in this case because I just want to identify this CA as something that's going to be a trusted CA in my infrastructure. And then I'm just going to go ahead and give it a name. And I've gone ahead and typed in the name there offline because it was kind of long in the path that I chose there and everything. And then I just next and finish. That's pretty much it. Again, very similar to what I did before. But now what I'm going to do is I want to import that into a client computer, to my, let's say, my Vista computer. So I'll just go ahead and open. Actually, I can use my existing Vista computer, I guess, for that. So I'll just go to MMC once again here. And then I'm going to go ahead and add in my personal certificate store. So I'll go to File, Add, Remove, Snap In. You've seen me do this before, so I'll kind of quickly go through this. And then I'm just going to go into my computer account in this case, because I want my computer. It's going to be a broad scope certificate that all of my users that log onto this computer will be able to use. And I'll go ahead and click on Finish. And then I can also then click OK. Now I'm going to go ahead and expand this down, and I'm going to enter this into my Trusted Root Certification Authorities, and we'll see some certificates in here from other well-known locations, Microsoft, Equifax, and some others that you might have seen in the past. What I could do here is to go to All Tasks and choose Import, and then point to that original location, or I could just browse through the file system or the network share, whatever it is, and double-click on it to import it in a similar fashion to the way I did for my EFS certificates. So then I'll go ahead and choose to import it, and it starts the same wizard that we saw before, and I'm just going to browse for my location here where I stored that. I think I put it in here. There it is. And then I'm going to just kind of next finish my way through it. I can place it in the following certificate store. Okay, so I can do that. That would be my Trusted Root Certification Authorities. And then I'll click on Finish. And now we see the import was successful, and now I do trust the AccuSource domain's certificate authority, and as a result, any certificates issued by this certificate authority will also be trusted by me. And then just as an FYI, once I've imported that into the Trusted Root Certification Authorities, that, even though it says it's under a local computer, that really is global. That applies to users and computers. In fact, I think I can still show you in this interface. So I'll just add, remove, snap in, go back to certificates. Look, now I'm going to my user account, but when I click OK here and go to the user account and Trusted Root Certification Authority certificates, sure enough, there it is. So it does appear under the current user, even though I did not manually import it there. It's kind of a global trust that has been created in that sense. And that's what I did, is I actually just manually trusted it in the interface that you just saw. Now finally, let's talk here about BitLocker. This is a new feature of Vista, and it's very useful especially for hard drives that might get stolen or compromised, especially in what we call an offline attack. This might be where I have my laptop, someone steals it in the airport. I just had a friend of mine, in fact, who had their laptop stolen almost right in front of them. I don't know how they didn't see it, but somebody must have been pretty good at stealing things. They stole the laptop right in front of him, and he was getting ready to do a big presentation at a huge conference, and had his slides on it and everything, and so he showed up at the conference with no slides whatsoever. Well, regardless, if this guy has a BitLocker turned on with his hard drive, at least the thief won't be able to access any data on it either, because what happens is there's an encryption process that takes place to where you cannot just take that drive, put it in some other computer, and take ownership of the files and change the permissions and all of that kind of thing, and then read the contents of it. BitLocker encrypts the entire hard drive, and there's really not much you can do by stealing the hard drive. Basically, all you can do is format it, I guess, and have another piece of hardware to use for your own purposes. But you can't read anything on it because this BitLocker encrypts the entire system volume, which is also a step beyond what EFS does, because EFS will not encrypt any system files. And in fact, it really shouldn't or couldn't, because EFS is encrypted based upon a user certificate. And how will the computer start up if there's not actually a user logged on and you encrypted the system files? That really would put you in an impossible situation. Whereas BitLocker can encrypt the entire system volume. Also, BitLocker is computer specific. So if you have multiple users that use the same computer, then multiple users could potentially see each other's files. So you might still have to have BitLocker and EFS encryption both in place to protect users' files from one another. Also, BitLocker provides startup protection, and this really directly relates to what I'm going to talk about next here, which is the Trusted Platform Module chip. But the TPM will release something called the BitLocker storage root key, and this is what decrypts the hard drive for us. Once that's released that key, then it's completely transparent to the user, and they shouldn't really notice any difference in performance or anything like that. But they get that startup protection. That's a big part of what protects them then from things like rootkits or offline attacks, where someone might be able to boot up a Vista machine off of a Linux boot disk, for example, and then be able to read all the contents of the drive and so forth. You could even boot off of a USB drive, for example, and to be able to access all of that. Well, now, because it's all encrypted right from the startup, even if you booted from a Linux operating system, you wouldn't even be able to see any of the files on the hard drive. They would just be completely encrypted. Now, the Trusted Platform Module does have to be, and this is a good exam question for you, I would imagine. The Trusted Platform Module has several versions, but the one that needs to have is at least version 1.2 in order to be able to work with BitLocker. Now, what the TPM does is it takes a look at the master boot record, active partition, the boot sector, Windows Boot Manager, and the BitLocker storage root, and it kind of does a hash value against all of those measured values, and it generates a unique result, which is then stored in the TPM. The next time the system boots, if any of these characteristics don't match anymore, then it will recognize that someone's trying to do an offline attack probably, and then it will no longer release that key that I told you about earlier, that BitLocker storage root key, and therefore no one can access the drive. Now, you can use BitLocker without a TPM, but in that case, you're going to have another key, and normally we'll keep that on something like a USB flash drive or something like that, and you have to have possession of that flash drive with the key on it in order to use the computer. If you ever lose that key, that computer is gone for good, and you'll just have to format the drive and reinstall everything. Also, let's take a look at some other characteristics of BitLocker. First of all, you can only use BitLocker in the Enterprise Edition of Windows Vista, which is only available for corporate customers and things. And then you can also use it in the Ultimate Edition of Windows Vista. So those are the only two versions. Anything else does not have capability of using BitLocker, and that again is very often the kind of thing you would expect to see on an exam in terms of exam questions. Also, when you use BitLocker, it's going to really wind up using two volumes. The first volume is going to be a 1.5 gigabyte boot volume, and normally BitLocker will assign it drive letter S. On my system, it didn't assign it drive letter S, it assigned it some other drive letter, because I was already using a drive letter S, so it's intelligent enough to know that if it's already being used, just give it something else. And then the other volume there, the second volume, would just be your operating system volume. Now, in order to be able to make this work, especially if you've already installed the operating system like I did on my laptop, I already installed the OS and I said, you know what, after the fact I realized I probably should have put BitLocker on this thing. I mean, what if somebody steals it? Then they could access all of my confidential data. So what you can do then is, with the Ultimate Edition, is you can download the BitLocker Drive Preparation Tool. This only works with the Ultimate Edition. Enterprise does not have this available at all. You have to have this partition created before you install the operating system with the Enterprise Edition. That's an important issue. With the BitLocker Drive Prep tool, this is available as a Windows Vista Ultimate Edition add-on, and so you do have to download that from Microsoft for Ultimate Edition. Now, as a potential exam question as well, and I don't know this, I'm just giving a good educated guess here. When Vista first came out, BitLocker would only encrypt the system volume, and so that is likely to be on exam questions in my opinion. However, since Service Pack 1 has come out, you're now able to encrypt other volumes as well, instead of just only the system volume. But if you see something like that on the exam, you're probably better to stick with kind of the company answer, that BitLocker only encrypts the system volume, even though that's not actually true anymore. Now, also, I already mentioned the TPM, the Trusted Platform Module chip. This is something that's actually embedded into the motherboard of the computer, integrated into the BIOS, in fact. Again, you have to have 1.2. And make sure that if it's not working, you're not able to get BitLocker working properly, that you have properly enabled it in the BIOS. Now, it's going to be a little bit of a guessing game, because in my experience with a couple of different BIOSes I've worked with, they have a TPM module, but in the BIOS they don't call it a TPM. They call it some security module or some other security name or something like that. They don't actually call it what it really is, so you have to enable it, and hopefully you're enabling the right thing, but just so you know, it does have to be enabled in the BIOS. Now, once you enable BitLocker, you also have the opportunity to store a key elsewhere. You can print it out, you can save it on a thumb drive, something like that, so that you can have it as a backup plan in case something goes wrong and it's not able to properly boot up. Then you can use the storage key to boot the operating system there. And that's what I was saying there, is you can use a flash drive, printer, and the like. Now, enabling BitLocker is a lengthy process, especially the encryption process where it encrypts your entire drive. Takes a long time. In fact, mine took like overnight to get the whole thing done, but it's 250 gigabyte laptop hard drive, so it's going to take a little bit longer. But so what I've done here is I've just done screenshots here for you as I was going through it, so that you can kind of see what takes place. First of all, when you have the operating system already installed, then with Windows Vista Ultimate Edition, you need to get the BitLocker Drive and Preparation tool. That's what I got here. Again, this is available from Windows Update. And then once I did that, I just launched it. You have to accept the license agreement. It checks your system configuration for you, and then it just gives you additional information. Remember, I said it earlier that it usually assigns a new drive of drive S. Mine was drive R because I already used S. And then the boot files are going to be moved to the new active drive. And why is that? Because you can't encrypt the boot files. Otherwise, the system will never boot because it has to be decrypted. So that's an important thing. The boot files are going to be on the new active drive, which is, again, a 1.5 gigabyte hard drive. The new active drive cannot be protected by BitLocker, again, because you can't encrypt those critical boot files. And they give a few warnings here that you can see that might be a good idea to keep in mind as you go here as well. Then what it does is it shrinks drive C. It shrinks it by at least 1.5 gigabytes so that it can create that new partition. Then once that's been done, then you can click on Next. And then you'll see here that, again, this is where I can turn on BitLocker. And I'll just simply click the Turn On BitLocker item, and that's pretty much it. Then there's my boot drive as well. Of course, you cannot turn BitLocker on the boot drive, so that's that. Then what we'll do is we'll save the password on a given USB drive, save it in a folder if we want to, if in a protected network location, for example. And that might be the case that you want to do in a corporation so that you can collect people's keys in case they lose their encryption capability. You can decrypt it with this password, and that will then be able to unlock that system. And then what we have here next is where it starts to encrypt the volume. It will run the BitLocker system check, which makes sure that it can read the recovery encryption keys before it encrypts the volume. This is a safety measure because you wouldn't want it to have it encrypt the hard drive and then find out that it was not able to properly read the keys and never be able to decrypt the volume. So we usually have a recovery password USB flash drive inserted so that it can have the keys stored on that while we're doing this process. And then once we click through that, then encryption will begin after a computer restart. So of course you restart the computer and then you'll see that it starts to encrypt it. Now this took a long time to go from left to right on my system. Yours may be a little bit shorter. Also, it might have to decrypt the hard drive first. And another thing to keep in mind is don't be alarmed when you look at your available free space because it uses as much as it can of the available free space to be able to encrypt the files. It has to have kind of scratch data area to be able to do that. I had like 60 gigabytes of free space on mine, and while it was doing its encryption, I was left with around, I think it was 6 gigabytes left. So it chewed up quite a bit of space just during that process. Once the encryption is done, it released the rest of the hard drive space back to me, however. And that's pretty much it. So that gives you an idea for how BitLocker works and how to install it and get it going. It's actually not too bad, not too hard, and as long as you have your recovery keys available, then you're pretty safe in running BitLocker. In this nugget, we talked about encryption and certificates. Remember that we started off talking about the encrypting file system, which we can use to keep critical files from prying eyes, and so that we can make sure that only we access those files or somebody else that we specify. Remember also that the data recovery agent can also access those files, but the certificate does have to be imported wherever that file is located. Also, we talked about certificates, and that's a big part of what we addressed in regards to EFS. We did have to manage some certificates a little bit and import and export certificates. We also saw that we can add a trusted root certification authority so that we can then, in sequence, trust any other certificates issued by that CA. And then we also saw that in BitLocker, we're not only encrypting individual user files, we're encrypting the entire hard drive, and this is very useful for protecting us against offline attacks. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.